And then the final topic we're going to talk about today is actually where you just were this week. You spent a few days actually at the NRA's corruption trial in New York, actually getting to witness Wayne LaPierre on the stand. So if you want to just talk about your week up there in New York, seeing the trial firsthand.
Yeah, I did a couple of stories for the site on this. There were a couple of revelations that came out, some new information that we hadn't heard before, which is almost kind of surprising at this point because, the NRA has already been through one trial. It's been 5 years since these things started to surface. Mike Spees, who we had on the show a little while back, was the first reporter to publish a number of these allegations from internal documents, but we're still getting new and fairly shocking expenses that are coming out. For instance, LaPierre testified this week that he actually authorized private helicopter flights in addition to the private jet flights. And these were done interestingly, he didn't try to justify them on a security basis like he has with a lot of the other expenses he's taken, whether it was the jet flights or even mosquito treatment for his house or landscaping for his house. He said these were security necessities because his security guards were getting bitten by mosquitoes and the landscaping needed to be redone to make his home more secure. And so the NRA had to pay for all of that in his estimation under security expenses. Same thing for some of the yacht trips he took with the NRA contractors. He's used this reasoning for a lot of the more eye-catching expenses that have been reported on. But in this case, with the private helicopter flights, he admitted that was just to beat traffic at NASCAR races. This was part of, excuse me, still getting over this cold. This was part of an effort by the NRA, according to LaPierre, to raise the NRA's visibility in general culture, to try and bring it to a more mainstream audience, try and convince people that it's not a right-wing group in his telling, that it is a mainstream organization for all kinds of different people. And so he argued that, part of their plan was to use, events like NASCAR races, sponsoring them, or recruiting celebrities from NASCAR or from the NBA or from the NFL or from country music into the group as a way of promoting the organization, of giving it more cultural influence, of countering narratives about it, negative narratives about the NRA. And so part of that effort involved going to NASCAR races at times. And I guess to avoid the traffic that comes along with going to a big NASCAR race, instead of sitting in traffic, they had Wayne LaPierre and other NRA employees flown there on private helicopters, which is a pretty remarkable thing. Like he didn't even try to justify that as some sort of security necessity. Just it was to beat traffic. So that was one revelation that came out. You also had testimony from the NRA's top lawyer, John Frazier, who, painted an interesting picture of himself and his role at the organization. He had worked for the NRA for a while in a non-legal role before he became a lawyer. In political roles at ILA, Institute for Legislative Action. And the NRA paid for him to become a lawyer, to take classes and pass the bar and all that. And then he went into private practice for about 18 months, so less than 2 years. And then they hired him right out of private practice after 18 months to be their top lawyer, to be their general counsel, but not just their general counsel, also their secretary. And they combined those two positions under him. And these are, the top legal positions at the organization. And he had, not only did he only have 18 months in private practice before this, but he also said he testified in court that he had no experience in either of those roles at all before he was hired to take them on. And then while he's been the top lawyer inside the organization, he testified essentially that he was sidestepped or shut out of most of the major legal decisions that the group has made over the last 5-6 years. That includes whether to sue Ackerman McQueen, which was their top outside contractor for decades, right? That's where a lot of the issues cropped up from, was this relationship with Ackerman McQueen, their old ad company. A lot of the stuff, the fancy suits, right, were bought by Ackerman McQueen for Wayne on Ackerman's advice. A lot of these things that people have heard of. The NRA executives, including LaPierre, were running expenses through Ackerman McQueen so that they didn't show up on NRA books. That's a big part of this trial, right? But so there was a big legal fight between the NRA and Ackerman once some of these things started coming out into public view, and there was an awareness that the Attorney General in New York was going to start investigating them. They started sort of blaming each other for the situation, right? And they ended up going to court and suing each other, and there were countersuits. But Frazier's role was apparently, he was not involved in the decision to sue Ackerman, which was a case that they lost and had to pay Ackerman. I believe it was like 8 figures, 10 to $15 million, something in that range. He also was not involved in the decision to, well, he wasn't involved in the drafting of Wayne LaPierre's employment agreement, which is what he used as the basis for taking the NRA into bankruptcy, for claiming that he had the authority to do that. They said it was in his latest employment agreement there, even though there's no language about bankruptcy in there. It talks about the structure of the organization. And so he used that as justification for making this decision, which, again, John Frazier was not involved in that decision either. He wasn't involved in the negotiation of the contract or the decision to take the NRA into bankruptcy, which, of course, also failed, did not work. And he actually, it's kind of remarkable. He was, not only was he not involved, but he wasn't told about most of these decisions until they happened. Like the bankruptcy filing, he wasn't told about that until the day that it happened, shortly before it happened. And he was told by the people who were actually making these legal decisions, which is the Brewer firm, the NRA's outside lawyer, who he admitted the NRA has paid $100 million, more than $100 million over between like 2018 and 2022. So, or 2023, but it's been a huge sum of money that has gone to this outside firm. And they're the ones who really have, according to Frazier's testimony, made all these major legal decisions for the NRA. And they were the ones who negotiated Wayne's contract and Wayne's lawyer is a former, is connected to the Brewer firm as well. And the person who told Frazier about the bankruptcy is also the person, the lawyer who is currently representing the NRA in this trial, the civil litigation that they're doing in New York. So, they really painted a picture of Frazier as not very in control of the NRA's legal strategies at all. And that really Brewer is in control of all that. Now, Frazier said, he testified that he didn't think that was inappropriate in any way. And he explained the amount of money that they've been spending on the Brewer firm by arguing that the NRA during that time period has come under, I think he called it attack by a lot of different, on all sides, I believe is what he said. And, so their legal spending ramped up tremendously because of that. That was his explanation. And he specifically called out the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, who's a Democrat, for being politically motivated in how she's approached the NRA in this civil suit. And so he was putting the blame for how much they're spending on legal fees to Brewer on all of the legal fights that they've gotten into, some of which he argued were politically motivated, like this civil trial. So I think those are the biggest takeaways. I will say there was also, in the Frazier piece, and this got some attention on social media, but I think it's been a bit underplayed, honestly, because there was kind of this incredible scene that played out at the very end of section of Frazier's testimony where he was asked, Wayne LaPierre admitted to a lot of things in this trial. He's already admitted to many of these things previously by paying back some of these expenses. Generally, he keeps it segregated to the private flights that he wasn't actually on, like the ones for his niece or his niece's husband, things like that, where he wasn't on the flight, so he can't use the security justification. And so he admitted in court to actually the NRA's lawyer that those expenses weren't proper. They shouldn't have happened. And he claims to have paid back the NRA with interest and back taxes for all of that stuff. Now, of course, this has been the NRA defense for a while, and LaPierre has admitted this for quite a while. So it wasn't necessarily new, but it was something that happened in court. And so on the basis of that, and he admitted to not filing disclosures for things like trips and meals and yacht rides that he and his wife took with David McKenzie, who was an NRA contractor, the guy who owns the yacht that has been talked about a lot with Wayne LaPierre. The yacht that he was riding on is a guy who's been paid by the NRA 9 figures over the last decade through various different companies that they contract with. So there's a sort of obvious conflict of interest there, but Wayne never disclosed any of that stuff, even though he was required to by policy. And so he admitted that as well in court. And so Frazier's asked about this at the end of, before they break for lunch in in court. And he's asked whether or not Wayne breached his trust. And Wayne is sitting there. LaPierre is sitting there in the front row. I was sitting 2 rows behind him. And he's watching Frazier on the stand. And Frazier equivocates about this. He says, well, I don't think he broke my trust. He was always sort of straight with me, and he would be honest about the issues that happened and wanted to rectify them. And that was how he approached this question of whether or not Wayne breached his trust when he didn't disclose, for instance, those conflicts of interest. And but then he's asked about whether Wayne broke the trust of NRA members. And I expected him to do the same thing with whether or not he broke his trust, right? And say, well, not maybe, yeah. But instead, he took a really pretty agonized pause. And he said, I'd have to say he probably did. Yes. And that was the last thing he said. That was the end of the testimony for that period. And Wayne, they got up, the jury left, and Wayne, who's being escorted by security the whole time, he also gets up and slowly walks out of the courtroom, and he doesn't come back the rest of that day. And that was the last day that Wayne was executive vice president. So that right there, where the NRA general counsel says in court with Wayne watching that he broke the trust of NRA members, is the last thing that Wayne LaPierre did as NRA executive vice president.